My brother inherited millions, and I was left with nothing but a dead farm in the middle of nowhere. Everyone thought I had lost everything, but what if I told you that broken piece of land became my gold mine? Hi, I'm Audrey, and what happened next completely changed my life. They didn't believe in me, but I turned the tables. How did a worthless farm become the key to my success? And more importantly, what's the price of finally proving them wrong? Stick around to find out how I went from the depths of family betrayal to owning my future. But I want to know, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I knew what kind of day it was going to be the second I stepped into that law office. The smell of polished marble, espresso, and the faint trace of expensive cologne hit me like a memory I didn't ask for. Midtown Manhattan always carried a scent of importance, of people who believed the world rotated just a little faster for them. I walked past a receptionist who barely looked up, her fingers tapping away at a keyboard like it owed her something. The elevator ride was slow, the kind that makes you notice how loud your own breathing sounds. I smoothed the front of my coat, cheap wool already pilling at the sleeves. I knew Will would be early. He was always early to things that mattered, and nothing mattered more to him than appearances, especially in front of Aunt Rachel. When the elevator doors opened, there they were. Will stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking every bit the part. Navy suit, slicked back hair, that quiet confidence of a man who's never had to earn his seat. Aunt Rachel sat perfectly still, legs crossed, reading something on her phone with that unreadable expression she wore so well. I cleared my throat softly. Will turned first. "Audrey," he said, like my name had a taste he wasn't quite sure he liked. "Thought you might have gotten lost. Parking's a nightmare out by the loading docks." I smiled thinly. "No trouble. I walked still driving that Subaru?" His eyebrows lifted with polite amusement. I sat without answering. No one asked how I'd been. I didn't expect them to. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the shuffle of papers. Daniel Ortiz, the family attorney, entered moments later. I remembered him from when our parents finalized their estate plan. He looked older now, grayer at the temples, but still with that lawyerly calm that made everything feel like a transaction. He greeted everyone with a nod, opened a leather folder, and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, this is the official reading of Richard and Eleanor Campbell's last will and testament, amended 2 years prior to their passing." My heart beat in my throat. I hadn't cried at the funeral, not during the speeches, not during the eulogy that Will delivered like a TED Talk. I didn't cry because I knew, deep down, I wasn't really invited to their grief. Per the document, Daniel continued, the entirety of the Campbell estate, including all liquid assets, real property, and corporate shares, are hereby granted to William Campbell as the primary beneficiary. Will didn't smile. He didn't have to. He just glanced at me, his mouth barely twitching upward. Daniel turned the page. To Audrey Campbell. A pause. The deceased leave Campbell Ranch, 200 acres of land in Pima County, Arizona, and its contents. Silence. I blinked. That was it? Daniel slid 2 envelopes across the table, one for Will, crisp, sealed, thick, one for me, thinner, yellowed at the edges and clearly not handled recently. Aunt Rachel cleared her throat. "I'm sure they had their reasons." "I'm sure they did," I said, standing up before anyone could say another word. Will leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "If you need help getting it listed, I know a guy. He's handled a few foreclosures out west." I didn't answer. My hand clenched around the envelope. The paper felt like it might disintegrate in my grip. There's a kind of cruelty that doesn't shout. It doesn't slap or scream. It just leaves you out of the room. That's the kind I knew best. I walked toward the elevator without looking back. The silence behind me was loud. Not a single footstep followed. Not a call. Not a word. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the metal. Tired eyes. Faint lines along my mouth. I looked like someone who should have seen it coming. Maybe I had. The ride down felt longer than the one up. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. Outside, the city was still alive, cars honking, people rushing to nowhere. But I stood there, frozen on the steps, envelope still unopened in my hands. I made it halfway down the block before I ducked into a tiny coffee shop, bought the cheapest cup they had, and sat by the window. It was only then that I peeled the flap open. Inside was a single, rusted key and a folded slip of paper that read, Campbell Ranch Route 8, Pima County, Arizona. No instructions, no explanation, no final letter from my mother, no signature, just a location and a key to something nobody ever talked about. My fingers traced the outline of the key. It was old, iron, or maybe steel, with worn teeth and a blue ribbon tied loosely at the top. The kind of key you'd find in an antique store, hanging on a wall under the label, Forgotten. I sipped the bitter coffee, staring at the address. My parents had once taken us there when I was 8. I remembered dust, a sagging fence, a man, Grandpa Arthur, who told me stories about rocks that could glow and metals that hummed. My dad called him a relic, said he wasted his retirement playing scientist in the desert. After Arthur died, nobody ever mentioned the ranch again, until now. I folded the paper slowly, tucked it back into the envelope, and watched a bus pass by the window. That ranch was mine, whatever that meant. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt curious. The road stretched for miles in either direction, a thin ribbon of cracked asphalt splitting the desert like a forgotten scar. My rented truck rumbled beneath me, suspension protesting every bump like it had something personal against the terrain. I hadn't seen another vehicle in over 20 minutes. Out here, even the sky felt bigger, like it had room to breathe in ways I hadn't felt since maybe childhood. Arizona had a scent all its own. Dust, diesel, dry heat that settled in your throat and clung to your clothes, and something else, something older, familiar in a way I couldn't place. Not nostalgia exactly, more like recognition. Grandpa Arthur used to say, "Some places aren't lost. They're just waiting for you to come back the long way." I never understood that as a kid. Driving toward Campbell Ranch, I started to think maybe he was onto something. The GPS gave up 5 miles back. I relied on memory, the handwritten address, and a splintering wooden sign that leaned crooked by the roadside. Campbell Ranch. Private property. No trespassing. The gate was rusted shut. I parked off the shoulder, climbed over the lowest point in the fence, and trudged down a narrow dirt path, boots kicking up red dust with every step. Then I saw it. The ranch looked like it had been forgotten by time, and not kindly. The house stood at the edge of the clearing, 2 stories of peeling paint, cracked shutters, and a sagging porch that groaned in the wind. Weeds reached waist-high in some places. The barn loomed nearby, half swallowed by the creeping wild. I climbed the porch steps slowly, testing each board like a piano key. The front door wasn't locked, just swollen with age and stubbornness. It gave way with a groan and the smell hit me. Mildew, dry rot, old wood, maybe something dead. Inside, the kitchen was a graveyard of what used to be. Cabinets hung open, one swinging slowly like it had been nudged by memory. The sink was stained, a brittle sponge fossilized in the corner. Mouse droppings dotted the counter. My stomach clenched. Upstairs, the bedroom was more dust than bed. A faded quilt barely clung to the mattress. I spotted an old ceramic lamp on the floor, shattered like someone had knocked it over in a rush. Nothing in this place felt disturbed, but nothing felt lived in either. I found the breaker panel in the hallway, opened it with some difficulty, and flipped the main switch. Nothing. I sighed, pulled out my phone, and turned on the flashlight. "You'll blow the wiring if you keep jabbing like that." The voice startled me so hard I knocked my head against the wall. I turned and saw her. Mid-30s, tan skin, dark hair pulled into a lazy bun, arms crossed over a faded tank top that read, Earth first, mining later. Sorry, I managed, blinking. I didn't hear anyone drive up. Didn't. I live just over the hill, she said, jerking a thumb behind her. Name's Sam, Samantha Diaz. You're Audrey, right? Yeah, I just got here. She nodded once, stepped past me like she'd been in the house a dozen times before, and crouched beside the panel. Figures they'd leave you the broken one, she muttered. Let me guess. You got the key and no instructions. I blinked. Exactly. She smiled, not unkindly. Story of this place. Your granddad was good with rocks, but terrible with electricity. Sam pulled a screwdriver from her back pocket, jimmied something I didn't fully understand, and within a minute, a hum stirred in the walls. The ceiling light flickered. Then, to my surprise, it stayed on. Try not to run the microwave and the AC at the same time, she said, brushing dust off her jeans. This whole place is held together with chewing gum and hope. Thanks, I said. You didn't have to. Yeah, I did, she interrupted. No one should walk into a ghost house alone. She scribbled her number on a paper napkin from her pocket and handed it to me. You'll need help. I'm around. With that, she walked out the door like she'd never been there. A rattlesnake slithered past the porch steps, unbothered. I stood in the silence for a moment, napkin in hand, and exhaled. That night, I didn't unpack. The bed felt too foreign, too soft with memories that didn't belong to me. Instead, I sat in the truck, feet up on the dashboard, a half-eaten sleeve of saltines beside me. The sky stretched above, littered with stars, each one sharp and cold and breathtaking. Somewhere deep inside, I wondered if I had made a mistake coming here. But I also felt something else, something rooted, old, waiting, like the ranch was holding its breath. The next morning, I wandered the property in sunlight. The barn was massive, bigger than I remembered. Its wooden planks had darkened with time. Some bowed outward like tired ribs. An old tractor rusted in place beside it, tires flat, seat covered in bird droppings. Nearby, a shed had collapsed completely. Just a pile of wood and twisted metal. Near the barn door, something caught my eye. A photograph, wedged under a broken flower pot. I pulled it out carefully. Dust clung to the glass. It was me, 8 years old, squinting in the sun, standing beside Arthur. He held my shoulders, both of us grinning like fools. I swallowed hard. I pushed open the barn door. It creaked, protesting the intrusion. Inside, it smelled like hay, old oil, and the kind of quiet that made you whisper. The floor creaked under my weight. Sunlight filtered through the cracks like veins of gold. I walked slowly past crates stacked against the wall, half-open toolboxes, and a wheelbarrow filled with God knows what. Then I saw it. Near the center of the barn, partly hidden under a moth-eaten rug, was a shape that didn't belong. I tugged the fabric aside and revealed a thick wooden panel, darker than the rest of the floor. A metal ring was embedded near the edge, a trapdoor. My heart kicked up. I knelt, wrapped my fingers around the ring, and pulled. The panel gave with a groan, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The air that drifted up was shockingly cold, damp, metallic, not at all like the desert heat above. I stood there for a long moment, staring into the dark. Whatever this was, Arthur had kept it hidden. He hadn't told anyone, but he'd left me the key. He'd left me this. I took out my phone, switched on the flashlight, and stepped onto the first creaking stair. "Well, Arthur," I whispered, "what the hell did you leave me?" It wasn't a root cellar. It wasn't a storm shelter. It was a lab. The air hit me first, cool and sharp, like the breath of something buried for years. It carried the faint tang of oil and metal, laced with a strange, earthy undertone, like the scent of stones cracked open under pressure. I stepped slowly, flashlight dancing over concrete walls reinforced with steel beams. The narrow staircase ended in a large, low-ceilinged chamber, and what lay before me was impossible. Rows of filing cabinets lined one wall, their labels yellowed and curling. Machines sat beneath dusty tarps, shapes vaguely industrial, their purpose unclear. On one end stood a long table with notebooks scattered across its surface, some open mid-thought. At the center of the room, a solitary desk lamp flickered dimly, still working somehow, still waiting. This wasn't some old rancher's tinker space. It was deliberate, scientific, hidden. I walked forward, half in awe, half in disbelief. My boots echoed across the floor, sounding too loud in the silence. Arthur. This was his world. I moved toward the open notebook first. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned the pages. Geological diagrams, mineral density charts, sketches of tubing and filtration systems. Words like yield potential, 82%, thermal efficiency, low impact, lithium concentration, test well 7B, lithium. I blinked, then looked around again, this time with different eyes. The crates I'd passed weren't random. They were sorted, labeled. Each held small rock samples, neatly cataloged with numbers and short codes. This wasn't hoarding. This was a research facility. I caught sight of something on the far shelf, a leather-bound journal, thick, worn, the spine cracked, but still solid. On the front, embossed faintly in gold, for Audrey. I stared at it for a long moment before reaching out. The leather was warm, as if it had waited years just to be touched again. I opened the cover carefully. The first page bore only one sentence, written in a steady, familiar hand. If something matters, you don't bury it, you plant it. I swallowed hard. Arthur. Turning the next page, I found a dated entry, March 1998, describing an underground brine pool with promising lithium concentration levels. There were calculations, test notes, even water sampling protocols. It read like a lab journal, but with just enough casual phrasing that it felt human. Every few pages there were notes written directly to me, personal ones, like this. Audrey, you always asked why the stars were quiet. I never had a good answer. But maybe silence just means something's still growing. I didn't notice the tears until they blurred the ink. I wandered deeper into the chamber, flipping switches until more lights sputtered to life. Then I saw it. A small tape recorder, old and boxy, sitting beside a collection of cassette tapes. Most were labeled with dates. One simply read, "Play me." I pressed the button. The tape whirred to life, and then, his voice. "Hello, little one. If you're hearing this, I guess you stayed longer than the others did." His voice was older than I remembered, softer at the edges. But the cadence was the same. That slow, thoughtful way he had of talking, like every word needed time to breathe. "I built this place after they told me I was wasting my time. Your father, well, he thought the desert made me crazy. Maybe he wasn't entirely wrong, but sometimes you have to go mad just far enough to see clearly. And Audrey, you always saw clearly, even when you were 8, climbing into the back of my pickup, asking why rocks sparkle." I smiled despite myself. I don't know how much of this will make sense yet, but I kept this hidden not because I didn't trust the world, but because I didn't trust what the world would do with it. Lithium, properly extracted, can change everything. But mishandled, it could ruin lives, land, people. So I waited, and I hoped. A long pause, a faint breath. Then, if you're here, it means you chose to stay. That's all I ever needed to know. The tape ended with a soft click. I stood there for a while, just listening to the silence again. In the back corner of the room, half obscured by a tarp, was a small vault built into the wall. Not massive, but clearly secure. I pulled the cover off and wiped away the dust. A digital pad blinked faintly. I stared at it. Birthdays. Always birthdays. I tried Arthur's first, then my father's. Neither worked. I exhaled and then, almost without thinking, punched in mine. 02-17-1988. The screen flashed green. Access granted. The vault clicked open with a sound that made my stomach twist. Inside sat a single USB drive, sealed in a clear plastic case, and a folded envelope marked with my name. I took the letter out carefully, sat down on the floor beside the vault, and opened it. The handwriting was shakier than the journal's, but still his. Audrey. If you've come this far, you already understand this isn't about inheritance. It's about responsibility. The USB contains everything: formulas, test data, maps, even the early patents I never filed. Use it wisely. Protect it fiercely. You have the mind to carry it further than I ever could. And maybe, just maybe, the heart to do it differently. The world wasn't ready when I was alive, but you might be. All my love, Arthur. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I felt something shift inside me, a current of purpose, of weight. I looked down at the USB in my hand, then back at the lamp still flickering in the corner. If this was real, if what Arthur left behind could truly change the game, I couldn't do it alone. I stood slowly, brushing dust off my jeans, and whispered to no one in particular, "If this is real, I'm going to need help." There's a difference between keeping a secret and protecting it. One is passive, the other takes work, planning, risk, timing, and after a lifetime of being underestimated, I didn't plan to lose the one thing that might finally prove them all wrong. Well, once told me, "You always hesitate, Audrey. That's why you'll never run anything." This time, I didn't hesitate. The morning after I found the vault, I woke before dawn, heart pounding with ideas. Coffee from a motel vending machine in Tucson served as my first office. My truck's dash became a desk. I tethered my laptop to a shaky hotspot and pulled up Daniel Ortiz's number. I hadn't spoken to him since the reading of the will, but I remembered how he flinched when he handed me the envelope, like he knew I'd been shortchanged. He answered on the second ring. "Audrey? It's about the ranch," I said. "I need to speak with you, privately." Daniel didn't ask questions. That was his specialty. 36 hours later, we met in the back booth of a no-name diner with cracked leather seats and a coffee pot that hadn't been cleaned since the Obama administration. I handed him the USB and a flash drive backup, both sealed in clear plastic. He studied them for a moment, then looked up at me. "Is this what I think it is?" "No," I said. "It's more." Over the next 2 hours, I laid out Arthur's research, the underground lab, the potential implications. I didn't oversell it. I didn't need to. Daniel's expression grew more serious with every page of the journal I showed him. "This needs to be protected," I told him. "It can't have the Campbell name on it, not now, not ever." He nodded. "You're thinking shell company. Maybe 2 layers." "3, I replied. "I want to disappear behind it." That day, Horizon Terra LLC was born, registered in Delaware, structured to filter everything through holding firms, with me as the sole, silent founder. No trace to Audrey Campbell unless someone really knew where to dig. That night, I called Sam. "Meet me at Lenny's in 20, I said, "and bring your truck." The roadside diner was a holdover from the Route 66 era. Neon sign flickering, jukebox busted, pie slices that leaned at suspicious angles. Sam slid into the booth across from me, looking skeptical. "You're acting twitchy," she said, unwrapping a straw like it owed her money. "I need a geologist," I said. "Someone local, discreet, and open-minded." Sam snorted. "That's a unicorn." "No," I said, sipping weak lemonade. "That's Dr. Melissa Tran." Sam raised an eyebrow. "She used to teach at Arizona State, did private consulting on desert extraction zones. We crossed paths during my consulting stint at Greenline Solar. Let me guess, you didn't part on great terms." I smiled. "Let's just say she thought I was naive." Sam leaned back, arms crossed. "You want to pitch her this? She's the only one I trust to vet it and not sell it out from under me." The next morning, Sam drove us 3 hours northeast to a diner even smaller than Lenny's. Melissa was already there, buttoned shirt, sharp eyes, zero patience. "I cleared a day for this," she said, not even bothering to shake my hand. "It better be worth it." I opened Arthur's journal and slid it across the table. She didn't speak for a full 10 minutes. Then, "Where is this site?" "Under the ranch. Fully sealed. Power running. Clean sample room. You'll have what you need." She tapped the page with one red-tipped nail. "If this is real, it's not just valuable. It's disruptive." "I know," I said. Melissa took a sip of her coffee. "You always were too quiet. Maybe that's your advantage." I wasn't sure if that was an insult or a compliment. She flew out the next morning, arriving in a dusty Jeep packed with portable testing gear, rock hammers, soil cores, and more gadgets than I could name. She didn't smile, just nodded and got to work. For the next week, we worked in silence. She drilled, tested, analyzed. I stayed out of her way, monitoring progress through notes she scribbled on sticky pads left around the barn. Meanwhile, I worked on the legal side, filing Arthur's early patents under Horizon Terra, adapting the wording just enough to protect our edge without losing originality. Daniel coached me through each document via encrypted calls. By the end of the 7th day, Melissa emerged from the lab with a folder in one hand and a look of disbelief on her face. "This isn't theoretical anymore," she said. "It's viable, it's scalable, and if Arthur's technique holds up under full-scale trials..." She looked me in the eye. "Audrey, this could rewrite the industry." Something heavy and exhilarating pressed against my ribs. That night, Sam and I sat on the tailgate of her truck, parked behind the barn under a sky so full of stars it hurt to look at. She passed me a taco wrapped in foil and cracked open a cheap soda. "I still don't get why you're doing this," she said. "Why not sell the tech? Cash out, vanish. You could be sipping margaritas in Cabo by now." I took a bite before answering. "Because for once," I said, "I know this isn't just a handout. I earned this, I own this, and I'm not letting them take it before I even get started." Sam looked at me for a moment, then raised her can. To not hesitating. I tapped mine against hers. To not hiding. Later, as the night deepened and the coyotes howled in the distance, I stood at the edge of the field where Arthur used to walk alone. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of iron and sage. I knew now what I had. I also knew what I stood to lose. And I wasn't about to let anyone, including my family, find out too soon. "Then we need to move fast," I said to the night, "before someone else finds out what's under this dirt." I wasn't looking for it. It found me anyway. Buried on page 6 of the Wall Street Journal, below a piece about rising copper exports and a half-page ad for tech wearables, was my name. Technically, not my name. It was Horizon Terra LLC, listed as the original filer of a patent for closed-loop lithium extraction via brine stabilization, credited to an A. Campbell. I stared at the paper for a long moment, the heat from my coffee forgotten. The clock had started ticking. Arthur once warned me, "The family name opens doors, but it also opens mouths." They were about to open. The ranch didn't look like a ranch anymore. The house still stood, slightly straighter thanks to Sam's cousin and a nail gun, but now it was flanked by 2 low-slung trailers acting as field offices. Solar rigs shimmered on the eastern field. A few engineers from New Mexico lived in rented RVs out back, drilling test wells and refining the machinery Arthur had only dreamed about. We kept everything small, quiet, but success has a way of echoing. Tyler Monroe showed up in a gray Tesla with dust in the wheel wells and a grin that said he already knew too much. He'd been watching Horizon Terra for months, tracking our early filings and leak-free operation. I agreed to meet only after Daniel confirmed he wasn't tied to any legacy players. We sat under a makeshift canopy behind the barn, me in boots and jeans, him in tailored khakis that looked allergic to dirt. "I'll get to the point," he said. "You've got something the entire energy market is chasing, and you've done it without PR, without legacy baggage, and without boardroom blood. That's rare." I watched him sip lemonade out of a mason jar. "And I want in, quietly, no headlines. I'll write a check for $100 million to get you through your pilot phase, with another $250 if benchmarks are met." I didn't blink. "And in return?" A minor equity stake. Oversight. Nothing crazy. You stay in control. I just want to ride the wave. Daniel and I negotiated for 2 days. On the third, we signed the deal. That was the moment we became real. Within weeks, we hired 15 new specialists, leased a secondary site in Nevada, and doubled production testing. And that's when the calls started. The first was from a reporter, someone from an online outlet that specialized in founder profiles. She wanted to confirm whether Horizon Terra's founder was any relation to Arthur Campbell, the eccentric Arizona geologist once ridiculed for his unconventional methods. I said, no comment, and hung up. The second call came from Will. I let it go to voicemail. Then he texted, "Is Horizon Terra yours?" I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, then typed back, "You were never curious about the land. That was your mistake." No reply. A week later, Aunt Rachel called. Her tone was clipped but civil. "We need to talk. The family is unsettled. A meeting would be appropriate." I almost said no, but then I thought, why not let them see it up close? Let them feel what it's like to be behind the curve for once. The meeting was at their Manhattan apartment. Same glass table, same smug view over Central Park. Only this time I wasn't wearing thrift store black or a too thin coat. I wore navy and confidence and silence. Will was already seated, jaw tight. Aunt Rachel stood when I entered, arms crossed. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to acknowledge your initiative." Translation: "We underestimated you." I sat. "Let's begin." Rachel cleared her throat. "The family is concerned about the implications of your venture. Given the inheritance, there are questions about ownership, about intellectual property." I pulled out Arthur's journal, placed it on the table. Then the patent filings. Then the sealed trust from Horizon Terra. "I own this," I said, "legally, logically, strategically. My name is on every line." Will leaned forward. "You used the land our parents left you. That ties it to the estate." "You mean the land no one wanted?" I asked. "The land you joked I'd need help selling?" His eyes narrowed. "Don't be naive. You think you can scale this alone?" "I'm not alone," I replied. "I'm just not with you." Rachel tried to soothe the room. "Audrey, this doesn't need to become a conflict. Perhaps some arrangement, shared access, co-licensing." "No." Will slammed his hand on the table. "We could sue." I didn't flinch. "Try it. But you'll be suing a Delaware-registered entity with no traceable ties to the Campbell estate, and I'll countersue for intimidation and breach of posthumous intent." Rachel blinked. I stood. "You didn't want this land. You didn't want Arthur's legacy. You wanted to erase the parts of this family that didn't fit your narrative. Now those parts are building the future." I turned toward the door, then paused. Rachel's voice followed softly. "You think this is over?" I smiled slightly. "No," I said. "I think you're finally behind." Back at the ranch, the desert felt calmer. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and iron. Sam was tinkering with the new water filtration system. Tyler had sent over 3 new engineers. Melissa was testing trace lithium on a neighboring parcel. The world was spinning faster. And for once, I wasn't chasing it. I was shaping it. The door was bright yellow now. I painted it myself. It wasn't a grand house, just 2 bedrooms, a wide porch, and a crooked chimney that leaned slightly west like it had something to say. But it was mine. Every beam, every nail, every inch of weathered siding had passed through my hands, or the hands of people who believed in what we were building. I stood in the doorway, tea in hand, barefoot on the wooden planks that still creaked like old knees. The wind carried the smell of sage and warmed earth. From where I stood, I could see the edge of the greenhouses, 6 of them now, full of vertical beds and solar irrigation. Horizon Terra's core operation had moved to a larger site up north, but here, this was still the heart of it. 2 days ago, I'd walked into the county clerk's office in Pima County with a folder under my arm and a quiet kind of determination in my chest. I signed the papers. The deed was in my name. No shell corporations, no holding firms, no aliases. Just Audrey Campbell, owner of 206 acres of Arizona soil and whatever secrets lay beneath it. It was strange how something that started as a consolation prize had become the most honest part of my life. Sam honked from the driveway. She stepped out of her truck with a box in her arms and dust in her ponytail. "I brought a housewarming gift," she called. "If it's a dog, I'm not cleaning up after it," I said, meeting her halfway. She grinned and handed me the box. Inside was a hand-carved wooden sign, smooth grain, bold lettering. "Campbell Ridge Energy begins." Here I blinked. "You like it?" she asked. "I love it," I said. "You built something real, Audrey. Thought it deserved a proper name." We hung it by the gate together, hammering it into place with sun on our backs and sweat on our brows. When it was done, she stepped back and crossed her arms. "Looks good," she said. "Better than the old private property sign." That night, I stood on the porch alone and placed Arthur's journal on the mantel. I hadn't opened it in months. I didn't need to. I remembered every word. He never asked me to win. He just asked me to listen, to stay. And I had. The door creaked behind me. Will stood at the threshold, thinner than I remembered. The suit didn't fit as well anymore, and his shoes had dust on them. "Nice place," he said. I nodded. "Thanks." "I heard about the land transfer. You really signed it in your name?" "Yes." He hesitated. "Look, things didn't pan out like I expected. Real estate collapsed. My investors pulled out. You know how it is." I waited. "I'm just saying, if there's a way to be involved, even a small piece..." I set my tea down gently. "You had the family name, Will. I had the family burden." He flinched. "I'm not angry," I added. "I just don't need to explain myself anymore." He left without another word. The next morning, I drove east to my old high school. I hadn't been back in over a decade, but they'd invited me to speak at graduation. The gym was warmer than I remembered, and the bleachers creaked just the same. I stood at the podium with a microphone that squeaked once before settling. I looked out at the students, caps balanced on curls and cowlicks, and smiled. "When I was your age," I began, "I thought being overlooked meant being unworthy. But sometimes being overlooked means no one sees you coming." A few chuckles, a few nods. "The world is going to try to define you by your resume, your background, your family. But here's the truth. What you build with your own hands, that's the part they can't take." I spoke for 8 minutes. When I stepped down, no one cheered. They just stood and clapped. The quiet kind of respect, the kind that stays. Back at the ranch, I brewed another cup of tea and stepped outside. The sky was wide and gold-tinted, clouds drifting like they had nowhere urgent to be. Wind chimes sang from the porch beam, an off-key tune that made me smile. I walked barefoot across the warm wood, settled into my favorite chair, and watched the light fall over the ridge. No lawsuits, no front pages, no victory speeches, just peace. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need validation. Because this small yellow-doored house, this field of quiet possibility, was mine. And that was enough.